Good day. My name is Mike Clark. I qualified as an actuary quite a long time ago in 1976. My current work is around the topics of responsible investment.
Okay, thanks for coming in today, Mike. Could you give us a brief description of your job history and what you're working on now?
Well, I started off many years ago, I guess, as a fairly traditional actuarial trainee initially. Soon moved out of insurance into investment management. After some time running money, I actually took a job with the profession when we set up a professional education unit. After some years there, I joined an investment management company who I left 2 years ago, and I set up my own firm working in the areas of responsible investment, quite a feature on climate change risk, working with asset owners. I guess that's a jargon word for pension fund trustees, insurance companies and other pools of capital, investment managers, regulators, policymakers. So really quite a sort of a wide remit now.
Okay. And what would you say, are there any interesting projects you're working on at the moment?
I'm honoured to be working with a UK House of Commons Select Committee. They're doing a green finance inquiry. I'm their specialist advisor on that. I'm a non-executive director at Brunel in the UK. There has been a pooling project over the last 2 or 3 years where local authority pension funds have been brought together and their investments are managed by one sort of central body. So I'm a non-executive director at Brunel. I chair the Audit and Risk and Compliance Committee there. I have a client in the States. I'm also on an investment advisory committee of an investment manager based in the UK. So a sort of wide range of, I guess these days one might call it a portfolio career.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. And over the course of your career, what have been the main technical challenges you've had to face and where your actuarial background has been of most value?
Well, I guess the technical challenges came early on because these days, I guess most of my work working with sort of people and ideas and policy, it's as much behavioural as technical. So for example, the IFOA published a risk alert last year on climate change. Risk alerts, as many of you know, are one of the tools the profession uses to alert members of the profession to particular issues. I contributed to the production of that and was very keen to promote that. I think that some of the systemic risks like climate change have great opportunities for actuaries and indeed CIRA members. So I guess from this point in my career, I've got more used to some of the sort of bigger systemic risks that we might talk about during the course of this conversation.
Okay. And so you mentioned obviously you now work in climate area, which is not a traditional area of actuarial practice. How do you find your actuarial background fits in with these sort of non-technical challenges?
I guess I had an early understanding of risk. That came through my sort of formal training. Clearly investment management, where I spent a lot of my working life, risk is all over the place. And I think increasingly I've sort of seen what we might call the sort of big picture risks. I do a lot of work around the Sustainable Development Goals now. I know that's one thing the profession is encouraging actuaries to get involved in. And I guess we can actually see those goals having risks attached to them if we society, humanity, is working towards those, and I guess not achieving those or achieving those more slowly or achieving those poorly, those are risks. I remember a good colleague of mine many years ago who said risk is an ex-ante concept who has an ex-post friend called pain, and that has sort of framed my view of risk, that risk is this sort of nebulous thing, it's hard to get hold of, but bad and sometimes good things can happen. So really it's as much about getting people engaged with these issues. My work with the Select Committee is really helping work with and challenge government about progressing green finance in the UK. So I guess most of my work is is less technical these days, but more about sort of policy, behaviour, moving particular issues on.
Okay. And when you found yourself working in these wider fields, as we call it, did you find it was a natural progression that you got there, or was it more of a leap?
Well, it sort of felt just like life. I think it was a natural progression. I think what you do realise when you move away from what we might call traditional fields, there's a whole new range of skills you need to acquire. So I guess I don't have much problem filling in my CPD requirements every year. If I talk briefly about working with the profession on teaching, I knew very little about teaching, so there are clearly interpersonal teaching skills. There's also the sort of, some of the frames of teaching. So when I started that work, the profession didn't have a syllabus. I think syllabus is now seen as part of the furniture. So actually learning how to design a syllabus, learning objectives, some of the sort of technical things, those are the skills that you have to acquire to be at all useful in what you're doing.
Okay.
I think as I've got more involved with some of these policy issues, I've become a great fan of systems theory. Some of the audience listening to this may be familiar with systems dynamics, systems theory, the work of Donna Meadows and others. I found that a very helpful way of thinking about the way that organisations, different sort of parts of the system, regulators, investors, actuaries, investor consultants sort of work together, the influences on them, the sort of conversations between the different actors. So one of the things I guess I'd say I've added to my worldview is some sense of systems theory, systems dynamics and interventions in the system.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier about the Sustainable Development Goals and the risks associated with them. Do you see that as a sort of big professional challenge that you or other actuaries will have to face in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yes, I think the minute you say challenge, I'd say opportunity. One of the skills which I know many of my professional colleagues have and I don't would be called, let's say, scenario modelling, scenario work, sort of technical modelling work, arising out of the Financial Stability Board's Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. There's a great focus on scenario testing. Are we heading for a 2-degree world, a 3-degree world, or something worse? And so I think the skills which many of my professional colleagues have are highly applicable. So if I was encouraging people for new interesting things to get involved in, then I'd certainly say that the scenario work around climate change would be professionally satisfying and actually very useful.
Okay, that's good to hear. And looking at what CIRA holders these days, what they've had to study, is there anything else you would want to sort of add on to that syllabus, or that would encourage them to look further into?
Well, I'm not too familiar with the CIRA syllabus, but I have this sense of sort of enterprise risk management, often focused on organisations. I'm sure many of those concepts can be applied at sort of slightly high level, maybe at the national level, in the context, let's go to the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement of climate change, signed by over 190 countries reasonably recently. I'm sure some of those sort of enterprise risk concepts can be applied at the national level. Some of the listeners to this are probably familiar with this notion of nationally determined contributions, how individual countries are sort of linking up and contributing to meeting the climate change challenge. So I'm sure if CIRA decide that this is a direction that some of their members and work will go, then I think the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, clearly climate action, where we actually have some good signposts on what to do. I think climate action number 13 of the 17. So I think anything, and it links in with sort of ESG factors, which many of us are familiar with in investment already. So one can see ESG as being a slightly sort of lower level manifestation of SDG goals and risks.